1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, warriors. Welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host, Ingrid. In the last 2 episodes, we followed Emma Jean Rowin's journey through an abusive relationship, from its onset to the depths of the turmoil. Today, after sharing one more excerpt from her book, When Things Collapse, we dive into a conversation about the thoughts and beliefs we each had held regarding our personal experiences with our abusers, both during and after the relationship. Here's Emma Jean. Hi, Emma Jean. This is episode number 3, and this is a very important episode. The other 2 were important as well, but this one we're going to talk about what happens once you are out of the relationship.
Okay. I'm excited to talk about this. So I'm going to start with one of the last chapters in my book, where I'm discussing after I've left the final time and how that manifests itself. Because what I want people to know is that you don't just get out and suddenly, it's not like a movie where it's all rainbows and sunshine. There's work to do afterwards. And for me, I had quite a bit of work to do. So this chapter is called The Work of Letting Peace In, and I'm going to read an excerpt. The obvious gift of severing our lives from Alec is that for the first time in a decade, I gain the ability to control my own peace and the peace of my children. And peace is a cherished gift for those who have been deprived of it. The unexpected caveat of controlling my own peace is that I can't stop myself from doing just that. And overnight, a meddling monster is born. This meddling monster thrives on the belief that Ava and Cal have already been through too much for one lifetime, have paid their allotted dues to tragedy, so to speak. So, with clear purpose, I set out to shield them from any potential new strife for the length of their days. This manifests in a number of ways. I interview my children for pain daily, checking in constantly to see how they've been treated at school by classmates, friends, and teachers. This information helps me predict which outside forces might pose the next threat to them. And once I identify those threats, I try to head them off at the pass, making phone calls to schools and parents like some sort of overprotective parental goalie, keeping my children's pain score at 0. Dare to come near my children with anything other than love and light, and I'll knock your block off promptly with my mom cleats. My counselor, Judy, calls this compulsion to control hypervigilance. She explains that, ironically, this type of controlling parenting has the potential to hurt my children over time. This perks my ears and propels me to do the work, but the tentacles of the hypervigilance monster are deeply anchored within me. It takes years of regular counseling for me to grasp the less is more concept of applying my input to my children. Putting it into practice, though, is another beast entirely. Judy explains that my checking behaviors are like a shot in the arm to a drug addict. They quell my cravings to control my own fate. The withdrawal I feel in letting my children live their own lives and make their own decisions is physically painful at times, but I keep trying and failing, hoping it will become less difficult. Judy claims that practicing mental habit changes over time reprograms my neural pathways, and eventually it will become easier until it feels automatic. I buy into this concept hard. The work of unraveling oneself is not easy, but I refuse to get this wrong for my children after all we have overcome. In the midst of this work, I also toil with guilt over leaving Alec behind in his chaos. Where does Alec's mental illness end and his humanity begin? Is his anger really just anger, or is it also hurt? Could he have gotten better if I hadn't left him? If so, am I to blame for his demise? Often when my happiness glows brightest, the shadow of guilt it casts is the largest. Judy explains this as survivor's guilt. You took the lifeboat and left, she tells me. Where would you and your kids be if you hadn't? There is an obligation that pulls at us as women, programmed into us through our motherly instincts, to nurture, to console, to rescue what needs our healing. For me, an empathic heart gives me a window to the inner child of some of the most hurt humans. I see it all around me, the disappointed youngster inside every adult's outer struggle. It's the same window through which I saw my father and the hurt child inside of him, teaching me to pity males and forgive them endlessly for their angry behavior. The origin of an individual's mental illness isn't a black and white matter. Was it drug use that led to the onset for Alec, conspiracy theories, or was it his family history that led him to the drug use and the conspiracy theories? We can never say for certain which combination or succession of these factors caused his devolvement into darkness, a chicken and egg scenario that cycles unsolved and clouds the barriers between what should and shouldn't be forgiven. Alec's childhood trauma isn't his fault, nor is his genetic predisposition toward mental illness. But today, I would tell my younger self that just because you can see the origin of a person's brokenness doesn't mean you're bound to endure the suffering it creates without end. We each have a choice in what we take on through compassion, and its extension cannot be without limits. After all, we each have our own inner child to comfort, our own peace to protect, and our own lives to experience. And regardless of the cause of a person's affliction, we cannot rescue someone who won't help themselves.
That was another page that I had marked. So you read the 2 pages that I had marked, so that I was like, oh, that's really important. That was one thing that I struggled with for a while, was trying to figure out what caused the abuse in my abuser's head, and was he conscious about it? Was it something that he wasn't conscious about it? Was he, so many things. And then I finally was able to get to the point with a lot of therapy of, why are you going to bother yourself with figuring him out when you have to figure yourself out and, identify, like, not that it was my fault that I ended up in a relationship like that, but do I have any characteristics that made me more susceptible to fall prey to that? And it, we've mentioned it in the previous episodes, is the self-love. And I don't think I loved or respected myself enough. And perhaps if I did, I wouldn't have carried on with that relationship for as long as I did. The other thing that I've read is that abusers abuse because they're abusers. Like, it might be mental illness, it might be their childhood, it might be a combination of both, it might be substance abuse, but there are plenty of people that have had bad childhoods. There are plenty of people that have been through each of these or all of those items, and they choose not to abuse. So abusers abuse because they are abusers, or
Yes.
they're abusive.
And also, many abusers are able to control themselves in all other public aspects of their lives. So there is a choice there, right?
There is, yes.
And that's something that I read really recently, I think, on Instagram, where I get a lot of that.
Yes.
But that was really important for me to see that. Oh, that's right. He could be really nice when my family came over, but not when it was just us alone. And I think that's, and the other thing is, when I would sit and ruminate and, what did it mean? Were his good times good? Were those real? Did he really love me? And I can't tell you how many times I would lie awake at night thinking about those things, both when I was with him and then after. And I mean, even just years ago, you wake up in the night sometimes and think, I can't believe this happened, and the answer I've settled on is much what you've just said. Through therapy, you learn it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the meaning is of those good times, because something I tell my kids all the time, since before they were dating, is if a person's good side is very good and their bad side is very bad, you have to let go of both. It doesn't matter what is the truth of that good side. It's just that it becomes irrelevant. Just like we were saying about a nuclear family, you're no longer allowed to be in a nuclear family if you're an abuser. And if you have a terrible side to you, then I no longer have to sit and factor that in. I shouldn't. Because if I'm doing that and I'm ruminating on that, I'm opening myself up to ask myself, should I have compassion for you? And the moment something is unsafe, you don't receive any more compassion from me, because that makes me unsafe.
That is such good advice, because the bad behavior, they can be so, and there usually is a huge, sway from one side to the other. When they're good, they're really good. You feel like you are on top of the world and you're the most important person in the world. But then when it's bad, it can be really bad. And no, you don't you don't get to pick one and that's what they're going to stay with. It's the same person. You have to drop all of it.
You're right. Because an intense person tends to be intense on both sides of that spectrum. So, and I think I was attracted to that because I didn't see that with my parents. What I have learned is that it would be better to have a 5 on the negative side and a 5 on the positive side than 2 10s, because you can't live with a 10 on the negative side. You can't live with that kind of intensity towards the negative. And so maybe if you have to seek out relationships that it took me time to understand that tumultuous feeling wasn't normal. I was used to that. And I also used to think, especially in my relationship now, when Scott and I first started to date, I would push his buttons when things got too calm, because once the honeymoon period was over, I think deep down I had a fear that if we didn't have intensity, he would be bored of me. Because I had always been with sort of these really cocky, confident guys who loved the excitement in a relationship and loved the intensity, whether it was good or bad. It's very freeing to learn to accept to be with someone who can just allow you to be peaceful and calm and love you in that calmness. That's what we should be reaching for, right?
Yeah, because that's healthy.
That's healthy. I did not know that.
Yeah,
before.
Those waves are a way to keep you unbalanced, and then for them to be able to maintain control over you, because you're so unsure of which direction you're going to go. Because at some point, there's a little bit of a predictability to their mood swings, and then at some point, there's no predictability. Something that would not have bothered them before is now creating this massive explosion. And I remember saying at one point to my abuser, I'm like, can you just be an asshole all the time? That way I know what to expect.
Yes. And you get into the habit of walking on eggshells. And at some point it stops working because you can't predict. Like you're saying, it's something out of left field. I would have never thought that would set you off, but it did. And all these other things that I'm tiptoeing around. And that's what, I don't know what that is. I guess is it a need to release an explosion? Is it asserting control? I don't really know. I don't know why it's that way.
I feel like it has to be. And I don't know if it's a conscious need or a conscious, thing to do to maintain control, but I do feel it is to maintain control because, if you just rip the rug out from somebody, you're going to be like, okay, that never was an issue before and now it is. So now I have to be even more on edge and more prepared for anything. And it confuses you too, because some of them will twist it of like, no, you're exaggerating. That actually didn't really happen. Or they'll forget. What are you talking about? I don't remember that happening.
Yes.
It makes you feel like you're crazy. And then you're just even more stuck in that relationship because now can I even turn to somebody to talk to them about this? Are they going to think I'm crazy or are they going to take his side?
Yes.
I know when you wrote about talking to your mom and how like you were reluctant to tell your family. And I think that's something that a lot of victims feel too, is because if you get certain friends involved or your family involved and you start telling them like, oh, he did this, you don't want them to cast this judgment because how are you supposed to take him back? They're going to be like, you need to get rid of that guy.
Yeah. How are we going to sit at a barbecue together next week if I've told you that he calls me a bitch? It's really, you don't want to cross that threshold. And I waited way, way too long to cross that threshold. And once I did, I remember seeing the look on my family's faces and my girlfriends' faces when I was just telling them, I was giving them just a little bit of a watered down detail, thinking, well, I'll just see what they think of this, and telling them something and them looking at me and saying, that's not okay. And thinking, oh no, that's not the worst of it. That's not, and that's some advice that I would give to people now is don't hide. I mean, I'm not saying, constantly be complaining about your spouse or your partner. Certainly I uphold my partner and I respect Scott and I don't go around telling people every argument or disagreement we have, but I would never again hide the bad behavior from my closest people, from my mother, from my best friend, because it put me in a position where I wasn't reading things from an outside perspective. And I needed that outside perspective to see the truth of what I was in.
Yeah. And I mean, you're also, if you are reluctant to tell somebody what's happening to you, that's already a voice inside of you saying, this is really not okay. Because if it's something like, oh my gosh, we had an argument about what we were going to watch over Netflix and he chose this, of course you can tell your friends that and they're going to be like, well, I would have chosen that too, or whatever. It's not that big of a deal. But if there's something that you're reluctant to tell somebody, that's your gut telling you this is really not okay. And that.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And ultimately, I think that deep down, we do know in our gut that it isn't okay. Because you're right. Why wouldn't we say it out loud then? It's hard. And you don't want to immerse yourself in sort of that isolation. And I was also a stay-at-home mom, so I wasn't going to an office anymore. I wasn't bouncing it off of my it's a normal thing for a coworker to come in a bad mood, I think, and say, he drove me crazy today and I'm mad at him. And if it's the kind of fight that's not a big deal, then everybody can laugh at that, right?
Right.
I wasn't bouncing anything off of anybody. And so I was living in my head. And so by the time I got out, I didn't know how to properly tell the story to myself to then understand I should have left. I knew when it came to my children, I knew that story. I knew they shouldn't be exposed to this, but it took me a long time to understand to myself, you deserve pity for what happened to you. Maybe not even until I wrote this book did I understand that I was a victim of abuse, which is crazy. It's crazy.
Well, it is and it isn't, because I think that tumultuous life that they have you living, the gaslighting, everything, you don't understand. You're so confused that it's difficult to actually put these into it like a definition and to be able to label it. For me, I knew in the back of my mind what was going on, and I didn't want to admit it out loud because I was like, if I say what's happening to me, then I'm a victim of abuse, and I'm too smart to be a victim of abuse. That's not what's happening. And so it took a long time before I could actually finally come to terms with what was happening and actually put that label. And I think that's a massive step, is for a victim to admit they're a victim. And that's when you make that transition of victim to survivor. Because once you're like, okay, I'm a victim, I don't want to be a victim anymore. I need to get out of this.
Yep. There's almost an imposter syndrome about it.
Yes.
And I had said that to my best friend after I wrote the book, and then in talking about, am I going to talk to this advocate about, helping get this book into the right hands? And I said, it's weird. Like, can I call myself a domestic violence victim? And she said, leave it to a woman to ask herself, have I been through enough trauma to qualify? And she said, anyone who reads that book would say, of course. And most people would say, this is much worse than I even knew. But there's something about us. And I think it's kind of what you've hit on. I thought I was too smart for that. That same quality of thinking I was too smart for that allowed me to absorb it. I'm too strong. This isn't going to hurt me. So maybe if I saw another girl's husband treat her that way, she would be an abusive victim. But if it happens to me, I'm strong. So it's not the same. It doesn't hit me the same,
Yeah. And I mean, I would turn things on myself like, okay, I can get mouthy sometimes. So I probably said something that set him off, Yeah. I'm a strong, independent woman. And sometimes that's hard for somebody to take, and yeah.
That's problematic, right? Because I felt the same. I'm an assertive person. I was raised by a woman who, had feminist values in the home. And I think during all the time that this was happening to me, I think I still was out in the world saying, I'm a strong woman. I'm a strong, independent woman. And all the while letting myself endure these things and not really feeling any pity for myself. Just that's my life. I'll get through it. And really just trying to find practical ways to just keep getting through it. And that's not the strong woman I was
Right.
trying to project.
Right. And I have, so one thing I wanted to go back, that imposter syndrome, I was actually talking to a friend about, he had come upon my podcast, and it's somebody that's from my hometown. And so we were messaging about stuff, and I said, sometimes I feel like I'm a fraud for having this podcast on domestic violence because I've had some bad stuff happen to me, but I've talked to some individuals that have had some really, really bad things happen to them. I was never drug out to the woods and had a shotgun put up to my head. That didn't happen to me. I'm like, so I feel like maybe I'm not the right person to be doing this. And he was like, do you know what you've told me that you've been through? He's like, that's abuse.
Yes.
And it's really weird how we can like downplay what's happened to ourselves. And I want to take a second, like you were saying some conversations, you've read in some excerpts from your book of conversations that you had with your abuser. And those were actual conversations. You didn't elaborate or throw in extra, words for dramatization.
I watered them down. And that's something that a lot of the, especially the quotations in this book, are very watered down because my ex-husband was so intelligent and so clever. The way he could spin insults was so destructive, and it was so poignant and hurtful. I actually decided at some point I would write out what was actually said to me, and then I would come back and change some words because it was so awful that I thought it would be irresponsible to put it on the page. And what if somebody reads this and one day they go say it to someone else? Because I've never heard anyone say some of the things.
Wow.
I mean, every part of my body has been insulted. And here's the thing. If you've got someone intelligent, it's not just some guy spewing obscenities. I mean, there were obscenities, but these are very nuanced turns of phrase. And he was taking things that I maybe suspected were flaws about me and turning them into this heightened, horrible imagery. And it's actually what you read in the book is watered down, sadly.
Okay. And I thought it was very believable, but I wanted to bring that up in case there's somebody that's never been exposed to domestic violence that reads it and is like, oh no, this is exaggerated. There's no way somebody would talk like that to another individual. So
I wish it's exaggerated. It's downplayed for sure.
Another thing I wanted to bring up as far as, feeling like a strong woman is when I got out of my relationship, I felt I've got this. I'm living on my own. I'm doing all of this. I'm so strong. And it's like I formed this little bubble again. I had my little abusive bubble when I was in it. And then immediately afterward, I had another bubble of where this is it. I've got this, the hard part's done. And I was cruising for quite a while, probably close to a year. And then all of a sudden I started noticing little cracks in myself where I was, I'd have like a male friend say something to me and I would just like lash out, like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, whoa, what are you talking about? And I realized I'm like, oh, I'm not okay. I'm holding a lot of issues inside of me, and I'm holding other people accountable for something that they weren't implying or meaning at all. So that's when, because I had done brief therapy right after, and then I thought I was okay. And then, so I was like, I have to get back into therapy again to figure out what's going on.
And it's so important to do that. That's the one piece of advice I would give to anyone who has left, a hurtful relationship, is that you've got some deprogramming that you've got to do. And you're right, things will cruise along just fine. And then it will pop up later. I still have some fight or flight patterns to my arguing. I have a very calm husband now, but if he's disagreeing with me, I mean, I might try and jump out of the car at Panera at the drive-thru because of my fight or flight is so strong. Well, I'll just get out here and walk home. That's crazy. And I have to work on toning that down. And also when you have been fighting with someone who goes immediately to a 10, or, with my ex-husband, I mean, that's the meanest person I've ever met. And I spent 12 years arguing with that person. I go when someone disagrees with me, or they hurt my feelings, or when I feel someone is crossing my boundaries, I go straight to a 10. And that's not necessary, and it's not normal. And it can be very, like you're saying, it's very off-putting to people, but it's something that it's not even just in my marriage. I will do it with friends. I will do it at work. I have to, you have to pull yourself back and learn through therapy to take a breath, and realize you're not in danger just because someone has hurt your feelings,
Yeah, because your brain makes pathways to try to, save you, or, make life more tolerable. So you can bury all these, I don't hate the word triggers. I do think sometimes people overuse it, like, oh my God, I put whipped cream on my coffee and it triggered me. But you have these triggers that are buried in there that you might not even be aware of. And then all of a sudden you're having this like massive reaction to something that makes no sense to anybody.
Yes, I will give you an example because I was so controlled in my first marriage, and it was a big deal if I wasn't allowed to go out and socialize and, be with my friends, in a lot of control in that aspect. So now where I am in a marriage where that is normal, because that is normal anywhere. If I am going somewhere and my husband asks me, hey, do you have any idea what time you'll be home? He would probably be asking circumstantially, do I need to get dinner on my own? Should I go take our kids to dinner? If he just asked me that question, I am immediately, I feel so much heat inside it. You don't ask me. I don't have to answer to you what time I'll be home. I mean, it's kind of he's asking for courtesy and to plan for the night, but I have a really hard time answering that question. And I have an internal reaction to that that's not congruent to what's being asked.
Yeah. And sometimes, therapy doesn't necessarily make that go away, but it at least clues you in as to, okay, let me recenter myself and figure out what's happening. He wasn't trying to control me. He's not, telling me not to go at all. But yeah, I can get that. I can totally get reacting that way.
Yeah, I think therapy kind of provides like a basic outline for you of why am I acting this way? And there is so much to unravel after getting out. It's not like, a J-Lo movie where that man is all, if you look at movies about abuse, especially older movies, it's a man who starts out, he's pretending in the beginning, and then he is evil. And it's very clear that he's evil, and he is immediately physically abusive, and he's never good anymore. He's only bad. And then when she gets out, her life is better. None of that is that black and white. It's so much more nuanced than that, especially getting out. There are years of work to do, but also within that, it's worth it because there are all those great moments of freedom and feeling great about yourself. And, oh my gosh, I can set my house up the way I want to. And I don't have to ask anybody to, go spend $50. And, those are the moments that make it worth it while you're working through it.
Absolutely. And it's okay to feel good and be doing well and then sit down and cry. And it's normal, I think, to miss that past life. You're not missing the abuse, but like we mentioned a lot of times that there are good times too. And you wonder a lot, at least I did. I wondered, well, was it just me? Like, is he going to be okay in the next relationship? Is that one going to work out? And it was just me. And why couldn't it have worked with me? And we had such good times and I miss that. Or would it just be easier if I just went back? Like I'm struggling here with whatever issues. Like, would it be easier to just go back to him? So I think all of those are normal feelings. And it's like you mentioned, it's not going to be all roses from here on out. It is work, and it's not fair. I'll say that too. It's not fair.
It's not fair.
It's not fair for you to have fallen in love with somebody who chose to abuse you, and you didn't let them abuse you. They chose to abuse you. And here you are trying to heal, trying to live your life, and you're going to hit some roadblocks along the way, bumps, walls, it might, whatever. And it's not fair.
And it's not fair, and it's okay that it's not fair, and it's okay to sit down and cry about it and let all of it out. And I think you feel better and you move on to the next time. And then you go another spell until something else hits you. And that's how you know what you need to work on, right? That's how you know what you need to go. I write things down to tell my therapist. She's in my head all the time. I'm always talking to Judy and, oh, Judy, I tell Judy this, But Judy also calls me on my own BS, right? So she does that in therapy. I have her voice in my head now calling me on my BS. And she's like, that's how you know the therapy's working, when my voice is in your head.
I liked how you had that interaction with your therapist about the book. And she's like, have you read the book? And you're like, no, I sent it. And she's like, of course you did.
Of course you did. Of course. She does. I like to make what Judy calls loopholes, where I come in and I'm like, I can't wait to tell you this great thing I did. And she's like, that's a loophole to what we were working on. And what do you mean? What are you talking about? Especially with my hypervigilance, I would do that. I would really come in with these causes that I really needed to help Ava out with this. And no, you didn't. She's, you should be sitting back. I do a lot of that in therapy, but I'm learning to self-regulate. But also, it isn't fair what has happened to us, and it's hard that we have to go through this work. But there are so many silver linings, and one of those silver linings is just my appreciation for the peace around me. I'm so grateful to just be healthy and happy and to have say over my own life and to have agency over myself. And I see it in my kids too. I think my kids have a different kind of appreciation for life around them, and a different kind of strength than I see in other kids. So while I would never have wished on them to go through these things or myself, I can see the aspects where it has also built us to be stronger and more appreciative.
Yeah. And yes, absolutely. And all the feelings are fine. And
yes,
if you want to be proud of yourself, if it's something little, absolutely celebrate that. Go get an ice cream sundae or something. Celebrate whatever. That's okay. You want to be pissed off? Get pissed off.
Yes.
Like all of that is fine. And it is great. And I love that you mentioned the kids, because I do think that, they definitely have a strength that, like you mentioned, you wished they wouldn't have to have gone through whatever it was that they went through to get that strength, but they are stronger. And so are we, and so are you. And it's work, but wow, to get to the other side and it's amazing.
It's worth it. And and you're right. We need to let ourselves be proud and celebrate. And you, especially with your podcast, should be really proud of this, because this is really, it's good work that you're doing here.
Thank you. And your book, I think, is going to be so helpful. It was, I'm sure you've heard of Colleen Hoover's book that she wrote that turned into a movie. Mm-hmm. I read that, I don't know, maybe a year when it first came out, maybe. Mm-hmm. What I like about, I'm going to say yours is better.
Did my mom pay you to say that? Right. Mom, would you call in as a guest?
But, I read both, and I do think that yours was better, because yours like took you into it. Like you were there, you're living the moment, reading it. And hers it's almost like you're watching. I mean, it was made into a movie. I felt like it was like watching a movie, like, okay, and granted, there's a lot of fiction in hers. I think hers is probably mostly fiction. I think she put a tiny bit of factual things that happened maybe when she was a kid to her mom or something. But yours really pulls you in. And I think that, I mean, maybe I'm biased because I've lived that, that life, but it gives a good understanding. And you even do sympathize with Alec at some point, I
still do.
And I mean, I did. And it's, I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, so, and a lot of times when you read a book like this, you're like, there's the good guy, there's the bad guy. You hate the bad guy. It's easy to hate the bad guy, and it's easy to love the good guy. And it just shows how real this is, because I don't think I ever hated him.
Yeah.
I think there were times where I was like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
And for sure there are parts where like my heart broke for him. And that's real.
Yeah.
And
I wish it were that easy. I wish it were as
yeah.
easy as love and hate and good and evil. It's more complex than that. And that's what we have to work through to get out. Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you did an amazing job.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of the book, and to read it, it's it has to be a little bit of like, I don't know what the word is. I do know what the word is, but it's not coming to me. But raw, like and just vulnerable to.
Yes.
You're letting people into this part of your life that is very difficult to share with even your closest.
Yes, especially
people.
at first. It was I felt very vulnerable, and I would even be in like these kind of bad moods certain days. I'd be very excited one day and, the book, people are on Amazon buying it, and people would give me good feedback. And then other days I would feel so vulnerable, and I would say to Scott, I wish I could just take it off and not put it out there anymore. I wish I had never done this. That is hard, and it's getting easier and easier. But I think I needed the perspective of people from the outside seeing it. And also, when I wasn't telling people my story, I wasn't being my authentic self. And it's important for us. There are people out there who would like women like us to just shut up and get over it. You're not being your authentic self. You can't know me. And anyone who reads this book would understand that you can't know me and not know that part of my story. That's a huge part of who I am. And your story is a huge part of who you are. So if we're going to make real friends and be authentic and connect, we have to put it out there.
Yes. Yeah, completely agree. And it's also healing to talk about.
It is.
You put it out there and it does help you process through it a little bit better. Well, Emma Jean, thank you so much again for joining me. This was great. This 3-part series was amazing. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. It's been really great talking to you. And it's actually just been more therapy and more healing for me. So I really am grateful to have met you and have this conversation.
Same. Thank you again to Emma Jean for joining me today. And thank you for listening. I have included the link to Emma Jean's 1 in 3 profile, as well as where to get her book in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong, and wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a 0.5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.